you for coming to our Lunch and Learn today. My name is Tabitha Scoville. I'm the Assistant Director here at CCHS. And next week I'd like you to look at your little flyers. We have Tony Kissel coming for a talk about John McGraw of Truxton. That should be a good talk. He's really got a lot of information on all these local baseball players. It's excellent. I'd like to introduce Marsha Powell. She's the Virgil historian, and she's so graciously agreed to talk to us about early Virgil. So thank you for coming. Thank you.
Hello. So I wanted to start off with a really nice picture of Virgil. And everybody thinks of Virgil as just the four corners or Greek peak, and there is much more to Virgil than that. This is a photo taken last fall from Van Donsel Road, looking down at the valley. And this year is not nearly as colorful. It's much more muted. But anyway, that's what it often looks like. So
I was laughing because that particular tree always looks like the guy has his finger up.
it's pointing the way to downtown Virgil, I think. Yeah. So I have a handout for you. This is a very cryptic map of Virgil that I drew, and you will quickly see I am not an artist. I'm not a, what is it?
Cartographer.
Cartographer. I was going to say mapologist or whatever. Anyway, if you would like to take one, share, whatever, but take a look at this as we go through. What I've done is Virgil has 10 historic markers. And so I thought I would go through each one of those and just talk a little bit about what that represents as far as the history of Virgil. So we're ready to get started. And I have this automated helper here. So Joseph Chaplin. Joseph Chaplin was the first settler in Virgil. And when you get the map, you will see it starts with number 2. The reason I did that is I numbered it for the slides that I have, and the first slide was just the intro. So it starts at number 2. This historic marker is down on Route 11, Messengerville. He was hired by the state to build a road from Oxford to Ithaca, and that was to help the people who had purchased land after the Revolutionary War. They had the land grants. They were going to be moving in, and they needed certainly a road. They could come up the Tyaph-Neoga River to a certain point, but they needed to start going west. So he was hired to build this road, and I'll talk more about that later. This sign represents where he built his home. He came to Virgil in 1792 to start building the road. He brought his family and built a home in 1794. And this is on the banks of the Tyaph-Neoga River. The house no longer exists, but there clearly is a marker there. And there's some little stories about people coming up and the boat washing away to get across the river, so they use a trough from an animal to, pull it across the river. All kinds of funny stories, but that's basically Joseph Chaplin. So I said I'd mention a little more about the road. He was hired to build this was the first state road in Cortland County. It was to go across to Ithaca, so it went from the Tyaph-Neoga River to downtown Virgil and then on to Ithaca. Except he started listening to other people who were starting to go west and settle, and they said, no, you shouldn't go to Ithaca. That's not going to be anything of consequence. Go further up the lake to a place called Kidders. And that's where everything's happening. That's where everyone's going. So he did. He listened to them instead of his contract with the state. So he built his road through to Kidders. And then he went to the state and said, my road is done, pay me. And they said, no, we told you we would pay you for building a road from Oxford to Ithaca. So go back, do it correctly, and then we will pay you. So he came back and spent 2 more years from Virgil to Ithaca building a second road. And then he was paid. There's an error on this. I'll read it to you. Look at it. See if you notice an error. The first state road in town of Virgil built 1793-94 between Oxford and Cayuga by Joseph Chaplin, first settler. There's a misspelling.
Joseph.
Joseph. The first one where they said the house built by Joseph, that was spelled correctly. They put Joe, Joesph. So this was pointed out to the sign company, and they said, oh, well, just take it off, return it to us, this heavy, heavy thing, and we'll replace it or fix it. And the town people that work on the roads are the ones who went around and put all these signs up. And they said, no, it's too much work to take it down, and it's probably rusted in place, and we don't want to disturb it, so it was never fixed. And I think it just adds a little more to the story, so I think it's good they kept it. So that was the first state road, and again, it was built so that people traveling west could go and start settling the area, and especially continue on west once they left Virgil. This is located right at the Four Corners in downtown Virgil, so on this cryptic map, it should be number 3, and that is what we call it, the Four Corners of Virgil, where Route 392 that goes in front of Greek Peak meets downtown, and if you turn, leaving Greek Peak and you turn to the right, that would be 215 that brings you into Cortland. So that's where we're talking. Okay?
Marsha, question. How did one man build a road? How did they do it?
Well, he had a crew.
Okay.
Certainly was not one man. And it was all forest. So it was cutting trees and pulling stumps.
Wow.
And at that time it was just dirt road. Certainly much later on they came up with stump pullers using, and they did use horses to pull some of them out. But then they found they needed to put stone down, but that was much later. These were all just dirt roads.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Hard work.
Yes. They should be coming around. We ran out.
Where's this one?
Here's another. And here's another. They're just growing, I think. Okay. Frank's Corners. On our map, that would be number 4, way down at the bottom of this map. So if you're at the Four Corners in Virgil, coming from Greek Peak, I said if you turn right, that's 215, that would take you to Cortland. If you turn left, you're going to be going towards Dryden, but instead of curving and staying on 392, if you take that first straight kind of exit, that takes you to Frank's Corners. Frank's Corners, named after John Frank. He was one of those revolutionary soldiers who was given a land grant, came out to establish his area. He was the second settler after Joseph Chaplin to settle in Virgil. Now, again, he's out at Frank's Corners. That's quite a distance even from downtown Virgil. It's, you have to cut a trail to get through there. So what we found is a lot of these early sites where people settled, they were pretty isolated. There wasn't this nice community, there weren't nice roads, we didn't have cars, of course, to travel back and forth. So you were pretty isolated, and you really had to try to make it on your own. They say that he brought several cows, so he'd have milk, and he brought 6 sheep, but they wandered off, and there were lots of wolves in the area, and they figured that the wolves killed them all off that first winter, so he certainly didn't have that either for meat or for the wool, for clothing. He was kind of on his own. He did bring his family a year later, and they built their log cabin. No windows, just logs. So that's where that's located, down actually the bottom of the map, but a little ways from downtown. Okay. G. Hill, John G., another Revolutionary War soldier. He settled up on we have G. Hill Road now, and that's the area where he settled. Again, he brought his family, and again, this was very isolated. This is, the other side of Virgil towards Route 13, so you're out there a ways. On the map, it's number 5, and I know it doesn't look like it's very far away, but boy is it. And again, back in the days when they had to just kind of break a trail to get there. They say his first house he built they used nothing other than an axe to cut the trees, put the logs together. He and 2 others came to build that first house. They ended up in a 12 by 16 one-room house. Had his parents, his wife, 6 children, and himself living there. So 12 by 16, it was a little crowded. Okay. The first schoolhouse. So first schoolhouse should be number 6. That's on Route 392 West, which goes from downtown Virgil to Dryden. The first schoolhouse, settlers were certainly starting to come into Virgil and of course continue on west. But by 1799 they decided, there were 6-7 families. The G's had 6 children, so there were a lot of children in the area. They started populating kind of different areas around town, the G Hill, Frank's Corners, this area on Route 392, and several other areas. And again, pretty isolated, but there were enough children in an area that they decided we need to start educating them. So the first schoolhouse was built in this area. Before that, it was just in people's homes. Maybe if there were close by neighbors, their children would come over and be educated in one person's home. But now it was time to really establish a schoolhouse. They had not the best luck with teachers in the early days. I think in about 1800 they had enough school districts. They said there were 7. Again, just because they were so isolated in different parts of the town. But teachers had a hard time. They would have to come, live with a family, teach. One story I read about, this poor woman didn't last very long because she said she had no heat. She was given a bed that didn't smell very good. It was very cold, and they gave her bread and butter, and the bread was hard as rock. The butter looked like it had mold on it, and nothing hot to eat. And then she had to take things with her to the schoolhouse to teach for the day, which included coal for the stove, and then water, a pail of water. She'd have to come back and get a pail of water for the children to have during the day, and on, in addition to teaching. So they didn't last very long. Some of them only lasted half a year, some 4-6 weeks. It was a rough start, but they kept persevering. And so we had 7 early school districts. At one point there were 20 school districts in Virgil.
Wow.
And again, one-room schoolhouses all over the place until they consolidated and came to have Virgil Central School, which is right in the middle of downtown at the 4 Corners, and that was in about the late 1930s. Okay.
So for point of reference, is that like where Van Gorders used to have the pig farm?
No, it's further out. Pig Farm is kind of on a curve. This is a little further out, but not much further.
Is the building
West
gone,
Meeting House, it's gone, yeah. West Meeting House Road
Okay,
is a crossroad. It's a little before that if you're going towards Dryden.
gotcha.
And the house right at the West Meeting House corner, I think it's still red. That used to be one of the schoolhouses. East Virgil. So Virgil through the years really built up in activity, and at the 4 Corners there's right now a great big building that used to be the Virgil Hotel. Now it's Gordy's Appliance Repair or something. But he bought it and saved it from it totally falling down. It was in quite disrepair. So Virgil became quite a big place to visit. For a while, East Virgil was even busier than downtown Virgil. So there were the usual shops, whether it was for food, clothing, gunsmiths, whatever was needed. That certainly was in central Virgil. But then for a while, East Virgil, which is towards the Tiafanioga River, just down that 392 east past Greek Peak, much further down, they started again building up that area because some settlers settled, and again everything was so isolated, didn't have good roads, so why have to go all the way into downtown Virgil when maybe we could have these things here. So there were lots of shops. And then 1856 was a really big flood in Virgil, and it wiped out everything. And today there is nothing left. You would never think that there would be any activity. There's just nothing left. It was all destroyed and nothing was rebuilt. So that ended in 1856. Now, during this time, of course, Virgil really was still thriving. The hotel especially was known all over for having dances and dinners. They would have entertainers come from all over the state, some from outside the state also. Virgil was just a real big center for all kinds of activities, all kinds of entertainment. They used to have to turn people away from the activities because the ballroom couldn't hold any more people. They even one year put a maypole up in the ballroom and had girls wind the maypole. I mean, there were just lots of 4th of July, Memorial Day, all kinds of activities to kind of celebrate anything that needed to be celebrated. They had a big dance in 1928. I'm jumping way ahead, but in 1928 they had a big dance to celebrate turning on the electric lights in Virgil. So whatever we need to celebrate, Virgil was the place to go. They put on a big show for you. All right, so East Virgil, great, very, very busy for a while. After the flood, 1856, roads are getting better. So now you've got horse and buggy and stagecoach. So it gets a little better for getting around. So they didn't appear to feel the need to rebuild, so they did not.
Was it Gridley Creek that flooded, or was it?
Yeah. It was Gridley Creek. This one, to me, is a strange song because there's like so much on it, but they didn't quite know what to label this area as. So they just said this is a historic area here and nearby. Kind of covers everything. So this is as you leave. As you leave Virgil, instead of going to Frank's Corners, you continue on 392 as if you're going to Dryden, but it's right where those roads split. And there's a historic marker there. Across the street had been a cheese mill, and there were all kinds of factories, sawmills, grist mills, a tannery, all kinds of things in that area. And that's between 1801 and 1965. I think they put 1965 because the cheese factory, this old dilapidated building, remained until it was finally torn down in 1965. But there's just no evidence of any of those buildings, any of those structures left in that area. There's certainly homes in the area, but that's it. There's nothing left marking it. Why it all disappeared? Who knows? Certainly through the years, Cortland's building up, Ithaca, lots of other places, so larger businesses would be going on there, not the need necessarily to have everything right here. That's what I would guess. The cheese factory has one kind of neat story. In the 1800s, they thought they were noticing that the attendance at their fairs during the summer was falling off. So they decided we need to do something to really bring the people back. So they decided, let's get all the farmers to donate, and we will make the largest cheese brick, I like to say a cheese ball, but a big brick of cheese. We're going to make the largest possible. If they'd had the Guinness Book of Records, they would have tried to be in there. So it weighed over 700 pounds. And it was this big thing they publicized, and it really did boost attendance. People just wanted to go see this crazy piece of cheese. Afterwards, they doled it out to all the farmers who had donated, so they all got their share. But I just, what people think of doing, I guess. Yes,
What year was that again, Marsha?
I don't remember. It was in the 1800s. I didn't know I was going to mention it, so I didn't look up the date. Sorry.
So was that Virgil Creek? It must have been a creek with all those mills, right?
Yes, that's Virgil Creek that goes that way. Yep. Gridley Creek goes down to the Tathnooga. Virgil Creek goes the other way towards Dryden.
Would these things been in Nathan Boughton's time? Would they be in his book, or were they before that or after that? Oh, there's his name right there.
There he is, our famous guy.
History of Virgil.
Yeah, I just don't remember the date of when the cheese was made.
Okay.
So
He
I'm
died
not
in
sure.
1870 something apparently.
Yeah, certainly would have been before he died, I'm
Oh.
sure. Yeah, I have a feeling it was before 1845, but I'm not sure. So Nathan Boughton. Nathan Boughton was an early settler in Virgil. Says he wrote and published a history of the town. He did write a booklet, has a lot of information about different categories, agriculture, education, all the typical things you would cover in kind of a history. And then he also talks a lot about celebrations and individual comments about people, which is kind of neat to read. He also, this by the way, is also on 392 West going towards Dryden. He was active in the Underground Railroad. And right across the street from this marker was what we called, or what had been called, the Freedom Trail Farm. They've just sold it recently, and the people took that sign down. It used to be on the side of the barn. It said Freedom Trail Farm. They took that sign down, so it's no longer marked. But his brother lived further, like around Richford, and at night would bring slaves, former slaves, in wagons of hay up to his house, where they would be fed, tended to, until they could then be taken further north, and that was to another brother's house, just south of Syracuse, on their way to Canada to help free slaves. So in the house, there used to be a tunnel that was from the kitchen out to the Virgil Creek that runs by. And I guess a former resident said as a kid he used to play in it, but then his family decided that was too dangerous and they filled it all in, which is really a shame. It'd be nice if the new owners would like to have it dug out to kind of preserve that part of history. So, yes.
Where is that home located?
It's on Route 392 West from, you're going from,
the curve.
it's around the curve, it's a little further out. It's before you hit the G Hill Road, and it will be on your left is a great big farm, and they have a lot of white fencing and a great big barn.
Would that be the Phil Seeger farm?
I don't
No,
know.
not that far.
No,
Okay.
they used to have those enormous Great Dane dogs
Yes.
out
Or
there.
whatever they
Can you
were.
picture that? No.
No.
Okay, well, you'll have to take a ride. You have this wonderful map. So on this wonderful map, that would be number 9. All right, so you'll pass the first schoolhouse one, and then just down the road you will pass this. Yes,
So now his farm was across the street from this?
yes. Yeah. So, first public cemetery. So obviously, when you have people moving into areas, we have births, we also have deaths. Originally, of course, people were just buried on their own land and may have had markers of some kind, maybe not. Later on, they did have markers, and some of the people down through the years, newer people moving into those homes kind of didn't like the idea of a cemetery on their property. Maybe they wanted to use that area, or just thought they're not going to be remembered. Their headstones will disappear, and then, you know, there's nothing. So they moved some of them to the current cemetery. In the very front section of our big cemetery in Virgil is a section where some do not have headstones, and others were moved there from people's properties if they found them. So some people said they turned over these big stones that they thought was just their walkway, and they lifted them to maybe reset them, and they found it was a headstone. So people made different uses of the headstones, I guess. So this cemetery is on Church Street. So it's near our town hall. It's just, you know, almost across the street, just up a little ways from there. The Congregational Church, that was the first building that was erected to be a church. And that was at that site. It was later moved. Lots of churches torn down. But the land was given to the town to serve as a public cemetery. So there are pretty old stones in there. We do have John Frank, Revolutionary War soldier, and some other very early settlers. But it wasn't used very long, because then our new cemetery that's been in existence since the 1800s also is the one that took over a lot more land. And so this one certainly is not active as far as burials. Okay. So the old stone mill, and so what I've done, we're jumping all over Virgil. I didn't go like east to west, north, south, whatever. I did it in the years that we're talking about. Back towards East Virgil, but a little further in, it's where Parker Street is, if you're at all familiar with Virgil. And that would be number 11 on the map. But it's just off Route 392 East. Ridley Creek comes through there, crosses the road, and continues. In that area, there were a lot of mills. That was a real big area for mills. There was certainly the earlier flood. There were several floods through the years. But there is an old stone mill, and we have a painting that was done of that mill, and it's lovely. It was by a Virgil resident, and that's in my office. But you look there now, and you do not understand how there could be anything like a mill using water to but of course they dammed it up and stuff, but there's just nothing in looking through there. You just don't see any evidence of mills. There's nothing left. But a really big flood in 1935 again. Now, those of you who live in Virgil know that floods aren't just in the old days. 2 years ago, we had a flood that closed off every road going into Virgil. And I was at the Cortland Repertory Theater and tried to get home, and I had to stay in a hotel in Cortland because all the roads were flooded. And guess what? That happened again this summer, but I was home. But all the roads into Virgil flooded. So there's so much water and creeks that cross roads or go under roads, and we get these downpours now, and they just wipe out driveways and roads and fill it with debris. It's absolutely been crazy. So again, 1935, this huge, I think it was mostly caused by rain, but certainly that caused the creeks to flood, and all the mills in that area, including the old stone mill, was wiped out. And again, it was by 1935, we certainly have much better roads and transportation, and there just didn't seem to be the need to rebuild all those mills in the area, and none of them were rebuilt. Okay. So our first fire station, 1926, so we jumped quite a ways ahead. There were a couple of big fires in Virgil, but this was the biggest, in that on the corner of the Four Corners in downtown Virgil. There was a store, and next to it, a really nice home. Well, the home is where this building now is. They say it was combustion that started in the basement of the store, and it burned to the ground, and it burned the house. At that time, this was 1926, they had no fire department, they had the bucket brigade. They called Dryden to have a truck come in, but the time it got there, everything was pretty much gone. So overnight they said, this is terrible, you know, we've got the hotel across the street, there's other stores right around downtown, houses are close together, we really can't have this again. So overnight they got a group of men together, they said, we're forming a fire department, we're gonna raise money, we're going to build a fire station, we're gonna buy a truck. And they did. In just a few months, they had the structure, they bought the truck, and they were up and running. And that was the beginning of the fire department. Certainly today, we have lots of trucks and rescue vehicles, all kinds of vehicles. We certainly have that need, as of course the population has expanded, but that was the very beginning. It's now, you'll see Virgil Historical Society. It's a building that's been used just to store records of the town, and also especially supervisor records, old records. And then there were some Historical Society things there. Most of that I've moved over to the town hall. I have a nice new office with lots of storage space. And the building's very old and musty, so I didn't want things to get ruined, so we've moved them over. And also that's, you know, people come to the town hall and we can display things instead of have them locked up there. So an earlier fire, one of the others in the Four Corners, was at the hotel, and they were able to put it out before it burned the hotel, but it burned the barn right next to the hotel. That did burn to the ground, but by then they were able to bring in more equipment and put it out before it tore down the hotel. The hotel was built in 1820, by the way. I mentioned that sometimes. And I think that is it. Sorry, but this is coming. So I thought, you know, we start with a beautiful picture of what it's like this time of year in Virgil, and then, you know, in maybe 3 months more. This is again on Van Donsel Road up at the top of the hill. Lots of tree-lined areas, so we get some really nice pictures in the snow. So any other comments or questions? Yes?
What was the path of that very first road west from Virgil to the lake?
It went from the Tyaftneoga, where Route 392 East crosses the river. It did cross there, and then went straight to downtown Virgil, and then went straight through the intersection on West State Road, and then worked its way up to Kidders. The second road to Ithaca came back to the Four Corners in Virgil, and then it's the 392 West, pretty much, that went
How did it get to the lake?
How did they get to the lake?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the path. That's what I was wondering. From Virgil west to the lake.
So on 392 West becomes Route 13. And then I know that's like a newer portion that goes right along the lake, but I don't know the exact road from there, say hitting up at the top of the hill with Route 13. I'm not sure exactly what road or how they would have gotten down to the lake, because I know the Route 13 is certainly, what, 1960s or so when they put that in. So that I don't know.
Kidders, is that like by where the power station is?
It's up near there, yeah. So it's a ways up the river, yeah. Yeah, they thought that was becoming the big settlement area instead of Ithaca. They were wrong, weren't they? Yes.
Do you have information on any schools that were put around? I know my husband's grandmother was a school teacher, and they don't know where.
Oh, which
Virgil
one?
was.
I don't have very much. I'd have to really search to see if I could find more. I have a map that just kind of shows where a lot of the schoolhouses were. But everything I've read about the schools, there isn't a lot of detail. Even some of the stories, like the one about that I mentioned, the girl with the awful food and that isn't with any name. It's just kind of a story that someone told. But I would certainly spend some time looking, yeah. Yes?
Apologize if I missed this, but was there a fairground of any sort, or?
It was really right in the middle of downtown, right across from the hotel where the school is now. That was kind of a green, and they would put up bandstands there and all kinds of activities. Yeah.
My mother grew up in Virgil and grandparents, and my grandfather his mother was a Ryan. And I have a Ryan family reunion picture, and the only person I can be certain of in it is my grandfather.
This is a Ryan.
I'm a Ryan.
Oh, good.
I've
We're
been trying to find my great-grandfather, so that would be
Well,
really funny.
There's several here, but I need the names if anybody can give me back, and I'll give
Oh,
them
that's neat.
to you for the file too.
Thank you. Okay.
So,
One of the old maps shows has the names of the families that live at the various houses that they've marked on the map. And one of them, if you follow Van Donsel down to Valentine Hill Road, there's one is marked Mrs. Ryan. So that might be where.
Right.
Van Dassel.
Yeah, and at that time I think it was called Schultz Road. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, there were a lot of maps. I have several in my office from different years where they'll list a lot of the houses. They'll put little dots and have houses all over showing where people had lived. Some are incorrect. I live in the Schultz house. It was not labeled as Schultz until the 1870s, but he built it in 1850, so that's all right. He gave it to one of his neighbors.
Yes, and if you get information.
They look like
pass it to
Ryans,
me.
they do. It's a certain look, yeah.
That's neat.
More than that.
Well, what a great addition to this. Maybe you're related, you might be cousins.
I think we are.
Good.
Are there many of the old schoolhouses still standing?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't. The only one I really know of is the West Meeting House School because it was turned into a house.
And that's the one on GM?
No, that's right at the corner of West Meeting House and Route 392
Gotcha.
West.
Because the one that's on G Hill is in some sort of receivership right now. The people who owned it are, I don't know, losing it. So it's just kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, I know of one other one, I guess, that was recently purchased. Husband, wife, the wife went out and purchased it. Husband's not happy because he's the one who has to fix it. So, and it's really in disrepair. It had been used as a house, but then just abandoned for years and years. So he's not looking forward to that hobby of fixing it. So there might be, there's a few around, but I don't know of very many.
There's on that old map, there's one marked that was located on Houck Hill and Odell. You know where that is?
I don't.
Okay, well, if you go up Van Donsel Road,
Yeah?
when you get to the top of the hill, the first right is called Odell. You just go down that hill.
No, it's the
until-
second, right? Black is the first.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Black is the first, the second. And it becomes a dirt road, and then
Yeah.
dirt road, and then Houck Hill intersects with that, or comes
Is
to the
that
T.
past to the west? Is it past where I live?
Yes.
Yes.
That's
That
where
one
you-
up on the right,
It's on the right.
Yes.
that's Houck Hill.
Yeah.
So what was there?
There was a school, according to this map, but
Oh, no kidding.
on the left, at that, near that, right near where Odell and Houck Hill meet, there is a small pool that somebody made long ago. Did you see
Oh,
that?
all the time.
It's
Like a lot of
beautiful.
Dog goes down there.
Yeah, yeah. And it's about 3 feet deep. It's about 10 feet across. It might have been deeper at some time, and I imagine that it
Yeah.
might have been part of the school playground or
I always
something.
wondered what that was.
I don't know.
There used to be a group that went out there and partied though too. so-
Yeah, oh, yes.
I don't know, they might have made it as a little
They
swimming
still do
pool. like-
party if you go past my house up to the corner there.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
I do keep an eye on that area. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can find it because it's all loaded with myrtle.
Oh, yeah, oh, that, yeah, oh, I know, I know.
It's a neat spot. Yep.
Any other comments, questions?
So that map that you were referencing, is that something that you have?
She probably has it.
Yeah.
Probably. I'm not sure which one.
It's got the names, it's got where the houses are and then the names of the people that lived in them.
Yeah, I have a few.
Okay.
Wasn't it
Buttons.
Ian Vandeler, isn't it?
All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed learning about Virgil, and please keep those pristine maps and use them to drive around Virgil. You can see where all the historic markers are. Okay?